The air in the old cinema hung heavy, a stratified blend of dust, forgotten popcorn, and the faint, sweet decay of celluloid. Blake worked with a methodical precision that defied the chaos of the surrounding stacks. Each reel, each poster, each faded program was a piece of history awaiting its proper place within the ordered universe of the archive. His hands, gloved and deft, moved across surfaces, brushing away decades of neglect. He had inherited this project, a vast, sprawling collection of the cinema's entire operational history, from its silent film beginnings to its final, sputtering digital projector. It was a monumental task, but Blake thrived on the quiet, systematic imposition of order. Today, his focus was Section C, Row 14, a series of locked wooden crates discovered behind a false wall in the projectionist's booth. They were not listed in any of the handover documents, an oversight that both annoyed and intrigued him. He had spent the morning carefully prying open the first three, cataloging their contents, mostly defunct equipment, spare bulbs, and corroded film canisters. The fourth crate, however, felt different. It was heavier, denser, its wood darker and more resistant to the pry bar. He knelt, his knees protesting on the cold concrete floor, and worked at the rusted latches. Finally, with a sharp crack, the lid gave way. Blake leaned back, letting the dust settle before peering inside. Instead of another tangle of wires or a stack of brittle film, the crate held a single object. It was a block, roughly the size of a brick, but its surfaces were not smooth. They were faceted, like a geode, yet without the crystalline sparkle. The material was a deep, impossible black, absorbing the weak light from Blake's headlamp rather than reflecting it. He reached for it, his gloved fingers hesitating just above its surface. There was no dust on it, no grime, despite its apparent age and the neglected state of its container. It felt clean. Unnaturally so. A strange sensation pricked at the back of Blake's neck. He dismissed it as fatigue, a byproduct of hours spent in the stale, recycled air. He had been meticulous, and meticulous archivists did not entertain phantom sensations. He carefully lifted the object. It was heavier than it looked, its weight disproportionate to its size. The facets, he now saw, were not random. They formed intricate, non-repeating patterns that seemed to shift and reconfigure as he turned it. Lines met at impossible angles, creating geometries that defied Euclidean principles. He ran a gloved thumb over one of the edges. It was sharp, yet not sharp enough to cut the heavy fabric of the glove. It possessed a faint, almost imperceptible texture, like polished stone, yet it yielded no sound when tapped. Blake carried it to his makeshift workstation, a folding table near the entrance, illuminated by a single, harsh fluorescent bulb. He placed it gently on a clean white sheet of acid-free paper, then removed his gloves. His hands felt strangely raw, exposed. He picked up his magnifying glass, a tool he usually reserved for fragile paper documents, and brought it close to the object's surface. Under magnification, the patterns deepened, becoming more complex, more unsettling. What he had first perceived as mere facets now resolved into an infinity of smaller, interlocking shapes. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the lens. They was that. Movement? He blinked, pressing his eyes against the eyepiece, but the effect vanished. It must be a trick of the light, or his own straining vision. The old cinema was notorious for its poor wiring, flickering lights a common occurrence. He catalogued it, object unknown. Dimensions, 12 cm x 7 cm x 6 cm, weight, approximately 2.5 kilograms. Origin, unverifiable. The entry felt inadequate, a clinical lie. He knew nothing about it. His usual methodical certainty wavered. This was not a film reel, not a projector lens, not even a forgotten prop. It was an anomaly, a breach in the ordered flow of the archive. It was not a sound he heard with his ears, but one that resonated deep within his bones, a low, persistent thrumming that made the small hairs on his arms stand on end. He glanced around the vast, empty space of the old cinema. The silence was absolute, save for the distant drip of a leaky pipe. There was no source for the vibration, yet it persisted. The hum intensified, a silent pressure against his skin. He felt a peculiar urge to touch it directly, to feel the impossible geometry beneath his fingertips. His internal logic, usually so robust, began to fray at the edges. This object was not merely an unknown, it was an interruption, a question posed in a language he did not understand, yet felt compelled to answer. He felt a distinct, undeniable pull, a resonance that reached deeper than curiosity, touching something fundamental within his own perception. The old cinema, once a sanctuary of ordered history, now felt like a cage, and he, the archivist, was trapped inside with a truth he was only just beginning to uncover. The object sat inert, yet its presence was a growing weight, not just on the table, but on the very fabric of his awareness. Blake had retrieved the artifact from beneath a stack of forgotten newsreels. It was a small, irregular stone, obsidian dark, but not entirely black. Instead, it seemed to absorb light, then subtly distort it, like a tiny, polished void. He held it in his palm, feeling an inexplicable coolness, as if it drew warmth from his skin. The surface was smooth, yet Blake felt the phantom tracing of symbols, a language he could not discern but whose presence was undeniable. He carried it to his makeshift workstation, a cleared space on a rickety card table amidst the towering shelves of the old cinema. Dust motes danced in the single beam of sunlight that pierced a grimy window high above. Blake placed the stone on a faded script for a forgotten melodrama, its weight disproportionate to its size. His fingers hovered, reluctant to touch it directly again, yet compelled to understand its nature. For 2 days, Blake had been consumed. The other archivists had noticed his distraction. The project lead, a meticulous woman with spectacles perpetually perched on her nose, had queried his progress on the inventory. Blake had offered vague assurances, deflecting him inquiries about the peculiar object now residing on his table. He knew his focus had shifted, irrevocably. He began by documenting the stone, sketching its contours, noting its strange, non-reflective quality. He tried to photograph it, but the images came out blurred, as if the camera struggled to capture its essence. This minor technical failure gnawed at him. He moved to the cinema's small, outdated reference library, a collection of film history books, forgotten local directories, and obscure cultural journals. He searched for any mention of similar objects, unusual materials, or historical anomalies in the region. Nothing. The stone was an outlier, an anomaly in every sense. As he delved deeper into the cinema's more esoteric holdings, old projectionist logs, personal diaries of former owners, even a box of unsorted fan mail from the 1930s, Blake began to perceive a pattern. Not a direct link to the stone, but a recurring motif. Certain symbols, almost glyphs, appeared in the margins of a projectionist's diary, scrawled next to notes about film breakages. A child's drawing, tucked into a fan letter, depicted a black, irregular shape at the center of a swirling vortex of stars. Each instance was dismissed as artistic fancy or madness, but taken together, they formed a mosaic of subtle, disquieting resonance. The psychological impact intensified. Blake found himself staring at the stone for extended periods, the faint coolness radiating from it seeming to seep into his thoughts. He attributed these to fatigue, the dim lighting, the dust-laden air. Yet, a creeping doubt began to insinuate itself. Was it the environment, or was it the stone? Was he simply tired, or was his perception itself beginning to fray? It depicted a femme fatale entangled in thorny vines. As his gaze drifted to the corner, he saw it. An almost imperceptible symbol, identical to one he'd vaguely discerned on the stone, hidden within the intricate floral border. He traced it with a trembling finger. As his finger touched the poster, a low, resonant hum vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't loud, but it was deep, a sound felt more than heard, originating from somewhere beneath the old cinema. The air thickened, carrying a faint, metallic tang. Blake's breath hitched. He snatched his hand back from the poster, his eyes wide, scanning the vast, empty space around him. He stood frozen, heart hammering against his ribs, trying to rationalize. Old building. Faulty wiring. Settling foundations. But the coincidence, the timing with his discovery, was too precise, too unnerving. He looked from the poster, to the stone, back to the poster. The symbol seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light, visible only to him. He flipped through the brittle pages until he found the glyphs he'd noticed before. Next to one, scrawled in faded ink, was a date, October 27, 1937. He cross-referenced this with the cinema's incident log. On that exact date, the log recorded unexplained power surge. Projection equipment malfunction. He was no longer simply archiving history, he was uncovering a narrative that defied explanation, a story that threatened to unravel his own. The isolation pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Blake's fingers tightened around the obsidian stone. Its inexplicable coolness persisted, a counterpoint to the humid air of the old cinema's projection booth. The object was heavier than its size suggested, a dense knot of something utterly alien. He traced its irregular facets, each curve and edge seeming to absorb the dim light filtering through the grimy window, only to subtly warp the shadows it cast. He moved from the projection booth, descending the rickety stairs to the main auditorium. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of light, illuminating rows of tattered velvet seats. The air here was thicker, redolent with the scent of mildew, forgotten popcorn, and a faint, metallic tang he couldn't quite place. Blake sat in the front row, the stone resting on his knee. He felt compelled to observe it, to understand its silent language. The hum intensified, not audibly, but as a pressure behind his eyes. The edges of the old cinema, once solid and familiar in their decay, began to waver. The velvet of the seats seemed to bleed into the worn carpet, the ceiling lights pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, not flickering, but expanding and contracting like some unseen organ. He blinked, rubbing his temples. This was not fatigue. This was a direct assault on his senses, orchestrated by the inert object in his lap. He picked up the stone, holding it closer. The distortions intensified. The intricate patterns of dust motes in the air coalesced, forming fleeting, impossible geometries. He saw shapes that defied three dimensions, structures that folded in on themselves, only to unfold into something utterly different. They were not solid, not liquid, but pure concept, flickering at the edge of his perception. He tried to focus on a single detail, the chipped paint on the stage proscenium, the torn curtain, but the stone pulled his gaze, twisting the very fabric of the view. A whisper, not of sound but of pure thought, brushed against his mind. It wasn't a language, but a raw, unformed knowing. It spoke of vastness, of depths beneath depths, of a reality far more expansive and indifferent than anything human comprehension could grasp. He saw the old cinema not as a building, but as a temporary arrangement of atoms, a fleeting pattern in an endless, shifting tapestry. The walls, the seats, the floor, they were merely consensus, a shared delusion. Beyond them, or perhaps within them, lay something else. Something vast, indifferent, and always present. The hum became a resonant chord, vibrating through his entire being. He felt his own consciousness stretch, thin, and fray at the edges, pulled by the immense gravity of this new, terrifying understanding. A key that unlocked the perception of the underlying, true reality. The cosmic horror was not an external threat invading from afar, it was the very substrate of existence, always there, just beyond the thin veil of human sanity. The comfortable, ordered world he knew was a fragile illusion, meticulously maintained by the limitations of his own mind. He closed his eyes, but the visions did not cease. He was seeing the world as it truly was, stripped of its comforting lies. He was seeing the true face of the universe, and it was not a face at all, but an endless, unfeeling expanse of incomprehensible forces. His determination to understand had delivered him to this precipice. He had deciphered the artifact's nature, and in doing so, he had shattered his own. His reality had not merely warped, it had dissolved, leaving him adrift in a universe of pure, terrifying truth.